My next guest has an unusual story. After building a successful career as a legal counsel and founding the firm Montgomery Hansen, he observed hundreds of companies succeed or fail in the Valley. He then made a bold proposition that advocated that startup companies should adopt the principles that the most innovative and successful companies had proven to be viable and adopt those right at the startup, right at the beginning of the company. John Montgomery published his ideas in a book titled Great from the Start, and it talks about how to avoid many of the pitfalls in building a great company. However, during the writing of the book, near the end of that cycle, John observed the personal and financial damages caused by the financial meltdown of 2008, and that gave him a different perspective that came out of this book, which will be one of the topics we talk about tonight. John, welcome to the show. I've known you for a number of years. I'm delighted to have you on the program. Let's start by you explaining to our audience what led you to write the book.
Well, Jim, it was an epiphany that I had while reading Jim Collins' Good to Great. I had the great privilege of working with Gordon Campbell in his Tech Farm incubator in the early 90s. And Gordy had a hot hand. He had about 20 companies that he incubated in the Tech Farm portfolio, in which he served as the executive chairman and co-founder. And in the midst of reading Good to Great, I realized that there was a pattern in how Gordy had created one enormously successful company after another. And my thought, the inspiration for Great from the Start, was to reverse engineer Gordy's magic. And my thought was that if I could reverse engineer the methodology that a very intuitive co-founder had used in building successful startup after successful startup, we'd have a blueprint in how to design companies from the get-go that optimize their probability of success.
How did has that worked?
You know, in many ways, I founded Montgomery and Hansen in 2003 as a laboratory to really test out the ideas that are in the book. And in 2003, I naively thought that I had really unpacked Gordy's methodology. And the deeper I got into it, the more I realized there was something going on a neurological and science of consciousness basis in how Gordy was constructing these businesses. Because what I observed was sort of a field phenomenon where Gordy, who had self-actualized by making a good amount of money and by having founded two successful public companies that he took public and ran, and having invented the fabulous semiconductor industry, Gordy had a hell of a lot of self-confidence. And he would use his state of being to infect the founders in each startup with the confidence that they could climb Mount Everest. And the founders in company after company believed that, well, if Gordy thinks that we can climb Mount Everest, well, we can do it. And they did. And this led me into a fascinating journey into the neuroscience and science of consciousness that was underlying the method in Gordy's madness. If a leader is fear-based, guess what? The field of consciousness within the business is going to be fear-based. The neuroscience shows that when we human beings work in environments where we're loved and trusted, we're twice as productive, twice as happy, and our tenures are twice as long. We stay in the frontal cortex, where our brains produce oxytocin, which is a bonding chemical, and dopamine, which makes us feel good, and we access the higher brain faculties, creativity, collaboration, and cooperation. And the underlying thesis of my book is we finally are beginning to understand enough about the human being and the human psyche so that we can actually start designing our businesses so that they're optimized for the human beings that have to work in them. And we can cultivate leaders that understand the neuroscience and psychology and consciousness so that they can inspire optimal performance from the people on their teams. And ultimately, what I witnessed Gordy do was activate a collective flow state, much like you get on a successful athletic team or a choir or a band. And he did this in company after company. The people in those companies felt that it was accidental, but my thesis is if you understand the underlying science, you can actually replicate these conditions which optimize the potential for successful business performance.
So it took a pretty accomplished individual like Gordy to do this. He did it somewhat unconsciously. It was part of his fabric of who he was. And he could tell somebody, you're capable of doing this. You're capable of crossing a river, and they would believe it. And
yes.
that belief is what enabled them, if I can use the word, empowered them to take off. Is that a movement or a subject that you're starting to pursue more beyond the book?
Yeah, I mean, my belief is that we're going to look back at the 21st century and it's going to be all about consciousness. Mm-hmm. And my sense is that benefit corporations, conscious capitalism, sustainability, impact investing, corporate social responsibility are all evidence of a massive shift in global consciousness from egocentricity to other centricity to a global or planetary centricity. Okay. We're one planet, and the internet connects us all in ways that were unimaginable when I started my career.
Yeah, it's a different world today. It's a different planet. I read the book and I've talked to you a little bit, and I think it'd really help our audience to understand this evolution from the sovereign king granting the initial tenets of a corporation to an entity to go and do whatever they wanted to without any regard to the people living there or the environment. Maybe you could revisit that concept. I think it's a very good foundation to where you're going.
Well, one of the biggest impediments to creating a sustainable global economic system is our basic corporate form. Mm-hmm. And what we all do is take the corporate form for granted. And virtually every sovereign nation on the planet uses essentially a corporate form that originated in the age of exploration in Europe in the 1500s. The corporation was generally used as an agent of empire, and kings such as the King of England would charter Hudson's Bay Company. Mm-hmm. It would give it a monopoly to exploit the entire Hudson's Bay watershed, which is about 15% of the land mass of North America. And the goal of that company was to conquer that foreign lands for the king and exploit them for the benefit of the company and also the royal treasury. And this was done at a time where the prevailing Christian ethos was that if you weren't a Christian, you weren't human. And so the native peoples that these companies found were treated, less than royally. And we believed that we were supposed to go out and exploit the earth for our benefit. Mm-hmm. So the ethos of the corporation is it's an agent of empire. And the original construct, the king was the external conscience of the corporation. So if the Hudson's Bay Company misbehaved, the king could yank the charter, give it to somebody else, put the managers of the Hudson's Bay Company in jail. And what happened in our American Revolution is that we inherited about 50 corporations that had been chartered in England. The English corporate form slipped into the new nation, sort of unnoticed, and we got rid of the king, but the conscience function served by the king devolved into our state legislatures. So until 1811, our legislatures served as the external conscience of corporations. And if you wanted to charter a company back in the early days of the Republic, it took an act of legislation. Mm-hmm. And New York changed all of that in 1811. One of the biggest innovations ever in the history of corporate law was the invention of free incorporation and limited liability. I see. And with those inventions, any sociopath who can fog a mirror can incorporate a corporation.
Yeah, and it has happened.
And it has happened. And so the social license mm-hmm. that flowed from the sovereign to the corporation was disbanded. And those inventions spawned the age of industry, which brought untold wealth and prosperity to the planet. But the result is the corporation has no internal social or environmental conscience.
Mm-hmm. So you've been a big advocate of the evolution of a new concept, the B Corporation, the Public Benefit Corporation. That is apparently a dual mandate or a dual priority or a dual responsibility. Maybe you can describe that a bit.
Sure. So I was instrumental in helping benefit corporation legislation get passed in California in 2012. California was the 6th state to adopt benefit corporation legislation. And I'm going to make your audience an expert in this new corporate form. It's incredibly simple. We tried to make the legislation as simple and user-friendly as possible. And the benefit corporation is identical to the existing general corporation. It's a for-profit entity with 3 key differences. There's a public purpose, which in California means the benefit corporation must optimize profits as usual, but it also must do it in a way that provides a material positive impact on society and the environment from its operations taken as a whole. So baked into the architecture of the corporation is the requirement to sort of juggle 3 balls. You've got to take care of shareholders, you've got to take care of people, and you've got to take care of the planet. People, profit, and planet. So the other element is accountability. So you have to measure your provision of a material positive benefit on society and the environment against a third-party standard. And there's transparency. You have to report how you're doing in providing a material positive impact on society and the environment to the public and to your shareholders at least annually.
That's great. That's great. Where do you think this will go? I mean, it started recently. Delaware just did it last year, California in 2012. It might take a certain number of years.
I think there's an enormous opportunity. Silicon Valley is the global megaphone for new ideas. The benefit corporation is a disruptive technology. It's game-changing. And my belief is that there's an enormous opportunity for a public company like Cisco, like Agilent, like HP, like Yahoo, Google, to become the first public benefit corporation.
Big public.
Big public.
Yeah.
You know, I would challenge Google or HP or any of these companies to become the first corporation to actually stand for doing good. And put their money where their mouth is by adopting a corporate form that actually requires them to act with a planetary conscience. And my belief is that, you know, just as Google became the thought leader in corporate America by standing for do no evil, it or another company could be a global icon for standing for good.
Yeah. We might get a startup, a big startup making a big hit who becomes a public benefit before we're going to get shareholders to agree to, because there'll be a fear factor, I'm sure. And there'll be a regulatory factor, there'll be this and that, and it may take that someone like the next Google, you know, next game changer Google comes along and does it. It's hard to say.
Well, the second biggest impediment to a sustainable global economic system is our lawyers. And we lawyers are risk averse. Yeah. And you know, the benefit corporation changes the fiduciary duty of directors. And they must determine, in determining whether something is in the interest of a corporation, they have to consider the effect of that action on all the company's stakeholders, not just shareholders. Right.
John, this has been very informative. I've thoroughly enjoyed having you in here on the television show, Game Changer Silicon Valley. I think I'm going to like to have you back. We'll see how the response goes, but I think there's more to talk about, which is we have this foundation. Now where do we go and how do you do it? And I think this will be a good follow-up program.
Fabulous.
So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim.
My pleasure. My pleasure. This is Jim Connor. I'd like to thank you for joining us for this week's version of Game Changers Silicon Valley. Each week we will address a new area, a new topic with innovators and game changers. We look forward to your interest and your participation in future shows. Thank you very much. Good night now.